Hi, I'm Abby. I'm a PhD student at James Cook University in the Seagrass Ecology Lab with TropWATER. I research the animals that eat seagrasses on the Great Barrier Reef and the impact that this has on our GBR seagrass meadows, and I'm here today to answer all of your seagrass and blue carbon questions, so thank you very much for sending those in. The first question today is from Beatrice, and she says, what is the situation with seagrass in the GBR area? Now, the first thing you need to know is there's lots of seagrass. It covers a really large area of the Great Barrier Reef, a larger area than the coral does. And we're in the most diverse bioregion for seagrasses here. We have over 10 species of seagrass in the Great Barrier Reef, and we can find some species down to a depth of 50 meters, which is pretty impressive for a plant. And we're monitoring the seagrasses here. So our team monitors the seagrass throughout Queensland. So we've got a really good idea of how it's doing, and we can pick up if there are any declines for any reason. At the moment, the seagrasses are doing really well. Prior to 2011, we were seeing some declines, and that was to do with the La Nina weather pattern that was happening. But since 2011, we've seen a good trend in our seagrasses, and they're doing really well, which is really positive given the declines of seagrass in a lot of other areas of the world. So that's good news. Gordon asked, what is the greatest threat to seagrass beds in Australia? Climate change or coastal development? So I've just said that the seagrasses are doing really well, but there are threats to them in the Great Barrier Reef and in Australia. Here in the Great Barrier Reef, the weather events that we can get can be really a problem for seagrasses. So think about the cyclones and the flooding. They can be quite extreme, so they can cause physical damage to seagrasses, and they can reduce the light available to seagrasses. And seagrasses are plants, so they need to photosynthesize. So if light levels are reduced for too long, that can cause declines and they can start to struggle. So those kind of weather events in the tropics and in the Great Barrier Reef are a cause of decline and a threat to seagrasses here. In terms of coastal development, the seagrasses are occurring right up to the coast, so they can often come into conflict with coastal development, and that can be important at a local level in terms of loss. But a lot of these projects are putting measures in place to protect marine ecosystems, including seagrass, and to minimize any potential losses of those habitats. In terms of climate change, there's a few different things. If we start to get more extreme weather events, more cyclones, more flooding, that's a problem for the seagrasses, so that can be a big threat. And then also in terms of waters warming up. Seagrasses can be tolerant of some changes in temperature without starting to decline, but if those are prolonged and extreme, so for example in the 2010 to 2011 heatwave in Shark Bay, that can cause declines, and in Shark Bay they saw a decline of 20% of the seagrass meadows there in that heat wave, which was over 1,000 kilometres of seagrass, along with lots of other marine habitats that were struggling in the heat then. Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef asked the next question. Hi Abby, this one's from us. Habitat loss is one of the topics for our Reef Radicals competition. Can you explain to kids why seagrass and mangrove loss is bad for the reef and the animals that call it home? Seagrasses and mangroves are both superheroes, and they have superpowers that benefit the animals on the reef and that benefit us. And if we lose them, we lose those superpowers. So what kind of superpowers can a seagrass meadow have? Well, it's a home for a whole range of animals, and lots of them. So seagrasses can be home to 40 times more animals than bare sand. It's a really good nursery area for young fish and a really good foraging ground for other animals too. And the seagrasses and mangroves and the coral reefs on the Great Barrier Reef are all really connected, and a lot of animals are using all of them and moving between these habitats. So they're not working individually, they're all working together to benefit the reef and to benefit the animals that live there. It's a home, it's a feeding ground, it's an important place for them to live. But seagrasses can also benefit us and mangroves. They are really good at capturing carbon and helping in the fight against climate change. Seagrasses can take up carbon 35 times faster than tropical rainforests, and they're really good at keeping it locked up. So if we lose our seagrass and mangrove habitats, that carbon can get released back into the atmosphere. So that's really bad for everyone, and bad for the reef too. And seagrasses and mangroves can also protect our coastlines from flooding. So they can stabilize the sediment and provide a physical barrier to the waves coming in, which is really good for us. And as somebody who researches the animals eating seagrass, I have to mention the turtles and the dugong especially, who are relying on seagrass meadows as a food source. If we lose these seagrass meadows, then these guys are going to struggle to find enough food, because dugong can eat up to 40 kilograms of seagrass in a day, and green turtles can eat up to 5 kilograms of seagrass in a day. So when we start to lose these feeding grounds that they rely on, then we can start to see starvation events of these herbivores. So we want to keep the seagrass meadows healthy to benefit all of the animals that rely on them and like to eat them. So I hope that's helped you guys with your entries for the Reef Radicals competition. And if you want to enter the competition, you can go to reefradicals.org to submit your entry. And you can also see one of my videos from an experiment I did in the Green Island seagrass on there too. The next question is from Kate. Hi Abby, is it difficult to restore seagrass beds, or is it kind of like replanting trees? In some ways it's like replanting trees, but the one thing that you really have to be aware of when you're restoring a seagrass meadow is, have the conditions changed, and why was it lost in the first place? What was the cause of the loss? Because if you don't remove the cause or rectify that, then your seagrass restoration probably isn't going to be effective. And if those conditions have changed since the meadow was lost, then just because a seagrass meadow was there before, the restoration or planting of a new meadow might not necessarily succeed. So you have to be really aware of that. And seagrasses are kind of like lawns. You can restore them with seeds and with turfs or sods. Moving from one meadow to another. And we've got lots of different species of seagrass, as I mentioned, and so lots of different seeds. So I've got a couple of examples here. You can see this one is a bit of a bigger seed, so easier to work with if you were trying to restore this species. You'd be able to find the seeds and replant them quite easily. But a lot of other species have much smaller seeds. So for example, these seeds here from a different species are more like the size of a poppy seed, so very small, harder to collect, and potentially harder to plant back out as well. And seeds have been used successfully to replant seagrass meadows in lots of different places. For example, large areas of Chesapeake Bay have been restored using seeds collected and thrown off of the boat. You can also attach seeds to something to anchor them onto the bottom, so they've been using bags and ropes recently in Wales to restore meadows. And in Western Australia as well, they've been using a combination of seeds, planting sprigs of seagrass and turfs of seagrass as well, quite successfully to restore meadows there. So in some ways like restoring trees, but also there's a few other things that you have to think about. And the last question is from Nicole. And she says, are there any cool projects involving seagrass restoration for blue carbon happening on the Great Barrier Reef? The answer to that is not yet, but there's a lot of research and work in this area. There's a lot of wetlands restoration that's happening, and this will restore a lot of blue carbon ecosystems. And there's a lot of research into how much blue carbon our seagrass meadows in the Great Barrier Reef are storing, and where this is being stored, mapping this and understanding more about how deep water seagrasses, for example, can store carbon. And we're finding out that they're storing a lot more carbon than we expected. So lots of mapping and lots of working on ideas of how we can start to restore some areas of the Great Barrier Reef seagrasses that aren't recovering naturally through being connected or through seeds. There are some areas that we might be able to restore, and some areas where we might be able to create new habitat to create new blue carbon systems. So there's a lot of research and work going on in this area. So keep your eyes peeled for some new information on that in the next few years. Thank you very much everyone for your seagrass questions, and I hope I've inspired you to love seagrasses as much as coral reefs on the Great Barrier Reef.